brief explanation of what is happening in Venezuela. Just like us, you've likely heard that something is happening in Venezuela lately. As it is the case every time, we are flooded by news from the mainstream media who have their own agenda. As usual, it's the same tune with concepts meant to scare us and not meant to inform us. They use all the big words: repression, dictatorship, censure. We are already accustomed to reading the underlying interests of the oligarchy and the banks and of the North American empire, who are behind the mainstream media. We will do a deeper analysis to understand what is really happening in Venezuela. It is very important to do a geopolitical analysis. Firstly, it should be known that Venezuela possesses the largest known oil reserves in the world. To best understanding what's happening in Venezuela, we have to look at what's happening with its northern neighbor, the United States. It is one of the most oil-dependent societies in the world. In terms of oil consumption, the United States has the highest percentage of vehicles per person on the planet. And of course, there are other needs for oil-based products such as plastics, clothing, and cosmetics. To sustain a population relying on oil, the United States imports 60% of the oil it consumes. Let us take a more general overview. Where does the oil come from? The Middle East is a key region. The United States imports an important part of its oil from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. With its allies, they strategize to maintain political dominance in the region. It is those energy interests, oil and gas, that are behind the war in Iraq, the violence in Syria, the Palestinian occupation, the Libyan intervention. So after analyzing all of this, a simple calculation helps us understand why Venezuela is so important to the USA. Oil coming from the Middle East passes through the Strait of Hormuz, circles Africa via the south, then all the way to Texas. This journey lasts 40 to 45 days. In contrast, the oil from Venezuela takes 4 to 5 days to arrive in the USA. When comparing the time and cost of shipping between the Middle East and Venezuela, we can better understand the North American interests in all of this. It's important to know how these interests has affected the history of Venezuela. For over 40 years, this was determined by the Punto Fijo Act, a political agreement between the two main parties of the country, Democratic Action and COPEI, Independent Political Electoral Organization Committee. Thanks to this agreement, they coordinated a common political program. The only thing that changed was the switch from one party to another following an election. These two right-wing parties sequestered Venezuelan democracy for over 40 years, defending only the interest of the oligarchy, leaving the Venezuelan people without any political representation. During all these years, they guaranteed oil at a good price for the USA. This also created a lot of unease amongst the Venezuelan people, whose protests became increasingly frequent and louder. In February and March 1989, these protests reached a peak and resulted in what is called the Caracazo, a historically sad event where the government gave orders to shoot on protesters. Over 3,000 people died. Amongst the military leaders who refused to shoot on protesters during the Caracazo, there was one who particularly stood out: the Comandante Hugo Chavez Frias. After a failed military coup against the murderous regime of the oligarchy, the Comandante Chavez stood in the 1998 election and was elected president of the Venezuelan Republic. The new Chavez government represented a historical change for the Venezuelan people. Firstly, because of the reinforcement of democracy in the country. All state institutions were restructured to be more democratic. Thanks to the National Constituent Assembly, within 15 years of the Bolivarian Revolution, no less than 19 elections, 18 of which were won by the revolutionary process. This process of permanent representative democracy was reinforced by different procedures of participatory democracy. Social policies also created serious advances. Poverty fell from 54.2% in 95 to 23.9% in 2012. Infant mortality reduced by 50%. Health and social security represents 20% of the state budget. University enrollment went from 800,000 to 2,600,000. 75 public universities throughout the country. Illiteracy has been eradicated around the country. Evidently, the North American Empire did not stay idle when noticing for the first time in its history the Venezuelan government was taking care of its people instead of the North American Empire's interests. And the new process of unification and emancipation of Latin America threatened its political dominance. In 2002, the US clearly supported a coup against the democratically elected Chavez government. Following this coup attempt that failed thanks to popular mobilization, the US instigated economic sabotage with an oil lockout supported by the oligarchy. This new attempt to destabilize the country also failed. What's happening now is again a new attempt to destabilize the country, however the strategy is different. It is called the Golpe Suave. The first step is economic war. Despite many changes in Venezuelan economy, the country continues to be relying on imports for basic needs. The oligarchy, who are historically responsible for this situation, are now trying to take advantage of it. On one side, certain industrialists who are from this oligarchy and want to end the revolutionary process generate a shortage of basic goods to create a discontent amongst the population. On the other side, certain sections of importers who also want to end this process speculate thanks to the dollar instead of using them to import basic staple goods. This demonstrates yet again the cynicism of the Venezuelan oligarchy, who are ready to do anything to take power back. Now let us see the second and likely the most important acts of the Golpe Suave, which focuses on media manipulation. The Venezuelan putschists' opposition is double-faced, one that presents itself as pacifist and the other that is clearly violent. Certain media companies, both in and outside of Venezuela, have become central to this Golpe Suave strategy by shamefully manipulating the facts that are happening on site. They want the entire world to believe that the Venezuelan government is violently repressing simple pacifist protesters. But this story, we know it all too well, and we will not fall for it. If we look at the history of Latin America for the past few years, we realize that the USA and the oligarchies have not remained passive towards progressive movements. There was a 2000 coup attempt in Venezuela. Then, in 2010, the coup in Honduras that was unfortunately successful. After, it was a turn of Ecuador, where by luck the 2010 coup failed. It does not stop there. The Paraguayan government of Lugo did not have this luck and in 2012 was victim of a parliamentary coup. Finally, in 2012 and 2014, we also denounced coup attempts in Bolivia. Currently in Venezuela, they are trying to repeat this history, but we will not let it happen. The people of Latin America have learned a lot from its history, and this time will not let the American empire or national oligarchies sabotage the process of change that's happening. Courage and strength, Venezuelan compañeros. Let's make sure this Golpe Suave does not happen.